Welcome to Black Hat Windows Security Conference 2002, held February 7th through the 9th in New Orleans, Louisiana. The following videotape was recorded live at the conference and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated.
Audit for Windows. Considering we're at the last presentation during Mardi Gras, I would say that I'm impressed at the size of the audience. Welcome and thank you very much for coming. My name is Todd Feinman, work for PricewaterhouseCoopers, along here with David Goldman and Joe Nocera, and we are managing the Windows security practice at PricewaterhouseCoopers. For those of you who don't know what PricewaterhouseCoopers does or is, we're basically a professional services firm specializing in audits we've been doing for the last 100 years. For the last 15 years, we've been specializing in doing security audits across IT environments, whether it be Unix or Windows. Today we're here to talk to you about, specifically, doing a deep technical audit on Windows security. I'm a manager within the Boston office in the Northeast region and manage the Windows security practice up there. David Goldman's manager in the New York metro region, managing that area of the Windows security core team, responsible for developing the audit methodologies throughout the practice used globally. And Joe Nocera, also a manager in the Chicago Midwest region. He is also manager in the Windows core team developing our methodologies globally. So the reason the three of us are here today is to talk to you about how you can create your own methodology. We're going to talk to you about the methodology we use in coming up with how do we do an audit that's going to be comprehensive, targeted towards your environment, relevant, and accurate. Things we're going to talk about today are the role of an audit. Why is it it's important to do an audit? We're going to focus on the methodology so that when you're walking out of here today, you feel empowered to be able to develop a methodology that is customized for your environment. And if you implement that methodology, you will have confidence in the results. Using our methodology, we go through what's called the Fabulous Five. We'll cover areas that are extremely important when we're talking about Windows security. And then lastly, we'll do risk management and wrap-ups so that you guys have a full understanding when you walk out of here what it is you're able to audit with confidence in its results. One thing I want to make sure everyone understands is that the presentation we're using up here today is going to be slightly different than the presentation in your handouts. We will make this one available to you, of course, through the web and the CD, and anyone else who needs it can always email us. Okay, the role of an audit. Why is it that we have to do audits? Well, for some people who are familiar with some up-and-coming news, you'll understand that audits are extremely important in today's environment. And while one of the most famous audits in history is going on right now, or lack thereof, it is in a different area. That was financial statements. And the one we're talking about today is security audits within the Windows environment. The same thing can happen. Risks need to be mitigated. So when we talk about the role of an audit, we're talking about two specific things, actually even more, but specifically preventative controls and detective controls. An audit can be used as a form of insurance. What you're doing is you're spending money today to make sure that you are prepared against something that's going to happen tomorrow. You need to mitigate the risks. When we talk about detective controls, we're talking about how is it we can actually find out if our environment is secure against intruders or hackers. Have we even been breached? A lot of times when we're going to clients, we'll go there, we'll be doing a standard audit and then realize that perhaps you've actually been hacked because we'll see certain holes, we'll see certain files that don't look right. So when we talk about the audit, again, two areas, preventative controls and detective controls. It's not just the fact that, well, we don't feel so comfortable or, we're trying to be proactive and we want to save some money in the long run by doing something today. There's also regulatory requirements. It's very important that in today's society, we are actually meeting certain regulatory requirements. The SEC mandates certain requirements. The healthcare industry has come up with a standard called HIPAA. This HIPAA standard, for example, requires security within IT systems throughout the healthcare, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, etc. GLBA, Glam-Leach-Bliley Act. Basically, this one allows financial institutions to do more than they were in the past. With that comes a certain requirement for security. If you want to be doing this, there are regulatory agencies that will mandate you have certain security requirements. So this is why we actually need to do audits. It's not something that it's just like, well, we got this internal department that really wants us to do things. They're always, climbing down our throats. We got to actually do it for them. There are very important reasons in society to be doing audits.
And Todd, I think one of the things we're going to talk about later is the importance to customize the methodology to fit your requirements. And one of those requirements you're going to want to take into consideration are what regulatory requirements your specific industry is under. So that may actually impact the methodology you actually end up using.
Absolutely. Thank you. The role of the audit continued: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. When we talk about what it is we want to prevent the compromise of these things. Confidentiality. Well, I have data, I have customers that are transacting, brokerage houses, people are buying stocks, selling stocks. You want this information to be kept confidential at all times. So, confidentiality. Integrity. You want to prevent people from denying that something actually happens. Maybe they say they didn't send an email, but they really did. Or they really did send an email and it has very critical information, and you want to be able to prove that he did or she did send that email. Integrity of your transactions. And of course, availability. I think it was about a year and a half ago when the distributed denial of service attacks came out, where sites went down because they were being bombarded with traffic. Availability, when we're talking about companies like E-Trade that make their money based on the volume of transactions, need to be constantly up. Well, the audit is going to be used to detect whether or not confidentiality, integrity, and availability are constantly being met.
So basically, what we're here to talk about today is really the way to build a methodology to audit the environment, which is what you see as the fourth bullet here. But that audit is really part of an overall security architecture, which, as you can see here, has risk assessment, data classification, and this really is the other side of what Joe was talking about before, targeted, customized for your environment. You need to understand where the risks are in your environment, and when you audit certain systems, whether they be domain controllers, mail servers, other infrastructure servers, in-house custom-developed application servers, you need to treat them differently, and you need to understand how critical those servers are to determine how much time and money and manpower you want to spend on each one of those type of servers, and how they communicate back and forth to each other to determine all of those paths. So basically, you want to determine the vulnerable areas and obtain specific information. So you need to get an amount of information that is valuable to you so you don't have information overload, and get it in a way that allows you to act on it. So if you just have reams of information that tell you these are problem areas in your environment, and it's not in a way that you can then create an action plan and actually make changes to your environment, implement security, then it's worthless to you. So after that point, you want to be able to check for compliance on an ongoing basis, and you want to make sure that security is not a one-shot deal. It doesn't just occur, okay, we implemented security, and now we're done. You need to have a methodology that supports a process.
And I think a good point there is the allow for remediation. I've certainly seen a lot of audit reports where sometimes the level of detail provided may not be specific enough, where it allows for a quick and easy remediation by the auditee. So making sure that whatever feedback you're giving them is very easy to remediate.
Now specifically, we do want to talk about our audit methodology, and more better for you, how is it you guys can create a methodology so that's for your environment? Well, when we sat down many years ago and tried to figure out what it is we need to put into our policies and procedures for securing a server or detecting the security on a server and whether or not it's sufficient, we came up with 3, 4, 5 things that were basically vital. The three main ones were comprehensiveness, relevancy, and customization. And then timeliness is also extremely important. I want to cover those 3 because I think that every component of a methodology will always link back to comprehensiveness, customization, and relevancy. When we talk about comprehensiveness, what we're talking about is making sure that you cover everything within the environment that could potentially lead to a breach. Now, it might sound like a daunting task or unmanageable, but it actually isn't if you do it right. And the methodology we're going to talk to you today about will help you do that. The comprehensiveness is absolutely important because you can look at, let's say there was going to be a hacker that was going to break into your registry through whatever means. But the idea is they're going after registry keys. They're going to try to hack you by going through specific software registry keys. Well, if you secure 19 of the 20 individual keys that potentially could be compromised, the hacker could still get in on the 20th. So when we say comprehensiveness, we're saying that, yes, you need to make sure you cover all of that. You can't necessarily do a random sampling of registry keys. You could do a random sampling of servers, which we'll talk about later. But it's important that comprehensiveness also means outside the registry. It also includes users, and it includes groups, and it includes services. And yes, it does sound like it's a lot, but you'll see today that it's actually something that can be done very quick and very easily. The important thing of this is, of course, scalability. You want to make sure that whatever methodology you decide to use, you'll be able to use it throughout your company or organization. Relevancy. You want to make sure that the audit methodology is going to be safe. If you can download some random tool and it's going to be able to audit your box, you put it on, and all of a sudden your box crashes, it doesn't do you a lot of good. You want to make sure all the time your computers are safe, especially in a production environment. Most of our clients do not have a specific environment for us to be able to audit. We need to go onto production servers. As much as we try to avoid it, sometimes it needs to happen. We're going to talk to you about safe ways to be able to audit these servers.
And
that's
that's a really key point. I think as an auditor, a lot of times you're an outside third party. Even if you're in an internal audit or you're a security person, you're not the owner of the system a lot of times. That's usually a systems administrator. So as that outside third party, just like you're a visitor to someone's house, you don't want to go in and trash the place. You want to leave it untouched. So the safety is really key. I don't care how good your technical findings are, if your tool crashed one of the client's systems, it's probably going to invalidate everything else that you're doing from a work perspective.
Yeah, and going along with that example of the house guest, the, of course, unwelcomed house guest, you want them out as fast as possible, which is why we talk about speed of the audit. When internal audit, if you're an administrator or you're an internal auditor, you know you want to be on and off that system as fast as possible. One, because it's safe, but two, because you're slowing down the system. The quicker you're off it, the better off you are, because the system potentially won't go down while you're on it. You want to add anything on that? Customization. This is without a doubt one of the trickiest parts of our audit methodology. Customizing it for every specific client. PwC doesn't necessarily have one audit that we use regardless of what client we go to. And for each of your environments, you don't want to have your audit methodology that's something you downloaded off the internet that's like a baseline security standard. It needs to be customized and tweaked for exactly what you're doing. Tweaked, targeted, and tailored. The idea behind this is, if you're running Windows XP on one server, Windows NT 4.0 with Service Pack 3 on another, Windows NT Service Pack 6A, Windows 2000 Active Directory Domain Controller, Windows 2000 Exchange Server, a SQL Server, you need to audit different components of each of those boxes. Believe it or not, you don't see a lot of tools today that have these types of options. Well, what is it you're auditing? What is it that you're doing? What's this server being used for? But for an audit methodology, it is so important that you know what the server is doing, its functionality, what operating system it's running, how much has it been patched. All of these components go into whether or not your audit is actually going to make you feel confident in the results you find. And timeliness, of course. You want to make sure that you're doing it within a change control window so that your audit does not disrupt production environment. And you also want to make sure that the data you look at is done and it's relevant for you when you're actually looking at it. You can't do an audit during a backup time, which might be at the end of the year, and then look at the data 6 months afterwards, and then say, okay, well, we looked at the data from 6 months ago, and we found out that there are some problems, and now here are our audit findings. Because first of all, with the way security patches are being rolled out these days, if you look at your environment today, 6 months from now, it's going to be completely different. Hacks are always being produced that you need to always be securing your environment against. Audits need to reveal what level of security you do have on it. Okay. When we also talk about the audit, we need to talk about from what perspective we're auditing those servers. What that means is you could try to audit a server and determine how good the security is as if you're protecting against people that are on the internet that don't have access through your firewall. That basically means maybe they have port 80 open up to a web server that's in a DMZ. Maybe they have maybe some DNS is open, SSL might be open. But at the end of the day, in Windows, NetBIOS won't be open, right? No one really opens up NetBIOS on their firewall to the internet because of the implications of that.
We hope.
We hope. That's right. We've seen it. So that is one scenario, though. Some people like to say, well, our boxes inside the firewall are secured as if we go on the assumption no one can get through our firewall except through port 80, and that only goes to our web server. So that's one way to do an audit, and that might be part of the audit methodology you want to use. Another type might be a targeted expert from the outside that maybe knows how to get through the firewall a little bit. Maybe they have certain access. Maybe there's a vendor segment, so they have certain access to certain boxes, and this person actually wants to hack. They actually know your environment inside, and they want to go after specific servers. They know your internal IP addresses. Maybe they did DNS zone transfer or something, and they actually are going after you, as opposed to just the script kiddies that'll run sub-7 port probes and back orifice, all of those. So this is a second level. Now you need to actually be so this audit methodology is going to be a little more rigorous. And then the last one that we will describe is the one where you're worried about someone being on the inside. Maybe you have people who can walk into your facilities. Maybe your facilities aren't even that physically protected. Someone can just walk in, network drop, plug their laptop in. Guess what? They just circumvented all that money you spent on your firewall by walking into your front door.
Right. And I think the basic point that Todd's getting across here is that you can't just take one tool and scan or look at a system from a single perspective and say, okay, we're looking at this from the external perspective and we're protected, unless that meets certain criteria that you've defined. But you need to assume that anyone with any level of access may be able to get to a greater level of access. So a script kiddie that scans all of Time Warner's cable modem space looking for port 80 does that first. Then they say, okay, here are the machines with port 80. Let me find IIS web servers. All right, now I found IIS web servers. Let me try to find ones that are still vulnerable to Unicode or still vulnerable to Code Red. And then they move on from that. Okay, now we get to the next level. And now we're a targeted expert. And maybe we can use some vulnerability to gain user-level access on the system. Now, somebody has access to that system in a way that you did not foresee. So you were keeping up to date on patches, you had good firewall rules, et cetera, but now somebody's a user on that system. So what can they do? So we need to make sure that that system was looked at from that perspective so that even when they're a user access, they can only do certain things and they can't get to the admin level of access and then start compromising other systems.
And for that reason, today, we're going to focus on the third audit methodology, which is as if someone is able to access your servers through NetBIOS ports and they are inside the firewall, because we do believe that it is possible, and we've seen the reports out there, that it is possible to get from, all you have is one port open on the firewall to this guy is inside your systems. We just went to, there was a presentation today on the bidirectional attacks, communications. These guys will go in on port 80, they'll map other ports through that, they'll map NetBIOS right through it. And now all of a sudden from your web server, they'll go after other computers in your environment through NetBIOS, and it's all running on port 80 to them.
Yeah. So the benefit of designing an audit strategy through the authenticated user is you're kind of covering the other two scenarios as part of that because it's the most comprehensive of the scenarios.
Exactly.
If you could protect yourself against someone that's already got a user ID, you're hopefully already protected from somebody that's a script kiddie.
The only thing I'd add is that you really don't want to just focus on one software package. There's a lot of auditing packages out there. There's a lot of software companies that claim, this is it. We got the audit software for you. Go ahead, download it, run it, you got it. We don't really, we've looked at them thoroughly. To date, we haven't found one that can cover an audit methodology that's customized for your environment, that's comprehensive enough to cover the types of systems you're using, and that is relevant and accurate and safe. There are very good tools out there, and they are excellent at covering what it is they need to cover. There really isn't one out there that's the end-all, be-all solution, and none of them are going to be customized for you. Okay, Fabulous 5. This is the audit methodology we came up with to make it as simple as possible to understand how it is we go through looking at an NT system. When I say NT, I mean 2000 XP, .NET, whatever. anything that's not Windows 95 or Linux or Unix. Okay, we look at system, audit, network, resource, and then user. So the system security assessment is going to be the first part. The reason system comes first is because you need to understand what the system is doing. The easiest way to do that is to start with this. All of the other 4 components will change based on what you find during the system security assessment of your audit. And we're going to go into a lot of detail on what that is. So I'm not going to talk to you too much about system right now, but the auditing component, this one is impacted by system, and this one impacts other ones because, for example, if auditing is disabled, well, that's going to actually change the way you go through your resources. You know, when you get to the resource security assessment, do you want to actually check the SACLs, System Access Control lists on every single directory? No, you don't, because auditing is disabled. So save yourself some time. Don't just go and use standard methodologies. Customize it. I skipped over network, so I'll just mention it briefly. The network security assessment is going to be the components you're running. You know, are you a DNS server? Are you an internet web server? Are you running shares? Are you, which of course most people are. Are you in a trust relationship? So there are components of the network security assessment that you need to understand based on that. So you don't even ask the question about trusts if you're not a domain controller, because the domain controllers establish the trusts. That's what you're going to find out during system. And based on that, you're going to go after users later. And the last section, of course, is users. You want to find out user rights, groups, etc. And we're going to go through all this in much detail. This is my slide too. System security. Okay, so all right, I'll start talking in detail. The components of system are the registry, the service executables, actually not just the executables, the services that are running, and a bunch of others. We're actually going to have some nice little demonstrations for you guys throughout the rest of this presentation. We're going to start developing an audit methodology that you might want to, I would say you would not want to use this methodology, walk away with it. But if you watch the way we've developed it, this is something that you guys can easily do. Every tool we're going to show you today is freeware, or something that we've scripted, which you can either have or script yourself because it's freely available from Microsoft Software Development Kit, easily gotten off of parts of it, at least the parts we're going to show you, are all downloaded off the internet for free from them. And it's all open source. So,
yeah, I think the key component here are these tools are kind of a baseline beginning foundation to understand what's out there. It's kind of the process that we started. After a time, you'll probably see some limitations in each of these tools, and you're going to want something better. And you'll start to be more comfortable with what's out there, and you can start to build a more robust toolkit of your own.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me give my voice across there for a second.
Got to shut Todd up every now and then.
Yes. Okay. So when we talk about systems, some of the key issues here are what's in the registry, because the registry is really kind of like the crown jewels of Windows. If you can get access to that registry, you can pretty much access anything you want. And you'll see through some of the types of hacker scenarios we'll tell you about while we're demonstrating these what can really happen. But we put up there, like, you know, the WinReg key, which says who is allowed to access your registry remotely. We'll talk about the AE debug key, for example. This is something where people can replace what your debugger is, and which also runs a system. So if they place a Trojan horse there, now they'll have administrator access to your box. And of course, this thing's called like the allowed paths. Well, these are things that don't adhere to the permissions on that WinReg key. Registry permissions. In general, there's a lot of keys that normal users will be able to run programs from, like the run key, the run once key, the AE debug I just described. So you need specific permissions on these to prevent people from actually changing them. Registry values, the restricted anonymous key, crash dump, clear page files. These are the types of keys you need to audit. We're going to talk about some of these in a minute. Installed services. This is the other big part of system. What services are running? Is the Exchange service running? Well, if it is, that means it's an Exchange box. It's a mail server. So you need to now change the rest of your audit methodology based on information. And you know what? Based on the methodology you're using, if you have scripted it, the neat thing is you take a look at what the service is running from, and you're able to pull the exact path in case someone didn't install Exchange from its default path. We've seen lots of audit tools that had C:\WinNT hard-coded into everything. So people were looking at permissions on C:\WinNT system 32. Well, guess what? If they install it to the D drive, it doesn't do you any good on your audit, and nothing will come up as bad because it doesn't find anything. So guess what? I just passed an audit because I installed NT to a different directory.
Right, and that goes back to the scalability issue where you may have some systems where you have a default, domain controllers, maybe you have a default system directory, C:\WinNT. Maybe in your DMZ, your web servers, you put the system in a different location. You don't want to have to go back and change your methodology for that specific type of information every time. You want something that's flexible and can account for changes like that.
Yeah, it's a great point. You can get a lot of excellent information out of the service information, the services that are running, like, am I a terminal server? Am I clustered? Am I SQL? Am I Exchange? And also during this audit, you need to make sure you're running tools that tell you, am I in a domain or a work group? If I'm in a domain, am I a domain controller? In the NT case, am I a backup or am I a primary? And you also want to find out what version of Windows you're running, what system path is actually used for the installation of Windows. Okay, we're going to start kicking off our, Joe wants to say something first.
Oh, no, that's okay.
We're going to start kicking off some of these demos now to show you how it is you can actually implement a methodology to take home to your specific environments.
How many people here are familiar with Security Configuration Manager, Security Configuration Analysis, et cetera? Show of hands. Okay, a couple people. So, yeah.
There's a whole bunch of people in the back there.
Yeah. Well, we have it up there as SecEdit because that's the command line version, and we tend to like to script things, so command line version is very nice. But a lot of the things that Todd was just talking about, you can actually look at via the Security Configuration Manager, Security Configuration Analysis, as it's called in Windows 2000. I think a lot of my clients are aware that you can use the Security Configuration Manager to implement security settings, but sometimes they overlook the fact that you can also use the same tool to actually audit those settings. And a significant portion of what we're going to cover today would be able to be covered during using SecEdit and the Security Configuration Manager. The way you get to that tool in Windows 2000 is launch MMC, so start, run, MMC. And if you click console, add, remove, snap in, you can actually add, I like to add two snap ins really, security configuration and analysis, and security templates. What this allows you to do first is define a template. And when we talk about the templates that you actually define, as I close that up a little bit, you can define templates again for all those baselines, whether that be an IIS server, a SQL server, an Exchange server, a domain controller, and you should define all those different templates because the security requirements for each of those servers is going to be vastly different. There are some great resources out there on the net. We heard about the NSA configuration manual that's out there that provides a set of INFs. There are several INFs that are available via Microsoft. The key there is those should really be a starting point. I mean, you're going to have to customize those standards to what you want them to be for your environment.
Right, and just to jump in for a second, remember that every default install of Windows 2000, XP, .NET Server, every default install right out of the box is the same. And there are certain security changes that you need to make right away across all servers. So there will be certain system directories, certain registry keys, some of the things Todd talked about already, some of the things that we'll talk about coming up that are really across the board. And so you'll have, say a 65% baseline that you can apply, and then the rest beyond and on top of that is where you're customizing things.
It's also important to make sure that you're looking at the right version of Windows for your audit methodology. I know there's not a lot of keys, but there was a landman server key. I don't actually remember exactly which one it was, but NT 4.0 in Windows 2000 actually swapped where the information for landman server was located. I actually don't know of any other examples besides that one, but if it happened once, it could happen again when we go to .NET, which is going to be released soon enough.
And that's definitely the case with XP and .NET. Some of the registry values that we're talking about here change slightly, particularly the way restrict anonymous is treated from Windows 2000 to Windows XP and Windows .NET. Oh, yeah. That's a pretty significant change. If you try to use a Windows 2000 template on a Windows XP system or a Windows .NET system, your results are probably going to be very, very inaccurate.
The biggest problem is probably the fact that the later operating systems like XP have a lot of extra keys in there to allow you to do a lot of extra security. Well, if you're using your template from Windows NT or 2000, you're going to miss out on a lot of those features.
So specifically what we're going to do, we're going to come back to SecEdit several times in each of these areas. What we're looking at right now are the specific areas that are covered under the system audit step. And that's really going to be looking at registry values and services, as Todd said. The registry values are located in an area in the template called local policies, security options. Within those security options, what you'll actually see is you'll see the kind of a friendly name, if you will, of how those things are titled in almost an English-like setting. And you'll see things like additional restrictions for anonymous connections. Again, that goes back to your restrict anonymous registry value. You'll see things like clear page file and shutdown, LAN manager authentication level. These all should be values and keys that you're hopefully familiar with. These actually get stored as just flat imp files in the WinNT security templates directory. If you open them up, they're straight text files that are fairly easy to read.
And just to jump in while Joe's doing that, this information that appears in the GUI and has friendly names, all of that is stored in the registry. And you can actually update that to add in your own friendly names and the options for radio buttons or drop-down boxes to set all of those things. And all that information can be updated with more registry keys than Microsoft provides you the friendly facility by default.
Yep. So you can see there, right here, and this is unfortunately very small. Let me increase this font to something that'll, whoa, that was probably too big. That's better. So we were talking about security options, and these are going to show up if I can, right here. You can see in the comments field, they're local policy security options. So all these things we saw in the GUI get translated back into just a straight text string in the INF file. And the nice thing is, it's actually giving you the registry path. Before the Security Configuration Manager, you were opening up regedit. You were manually navigating to this registry path, HKey local machine system, current control set, and either verifying the value if you were doing an audit or actually changing the value if you were doing an implementation. Whereas now with these templates, you define it once, you run and analyze, it tells you whether or not the setting is still correct, and then at a later date, if you're responsible for the implementation, you then do a configure, and it actually implements the change for you.
So now you see that you actually have, so this was actually step one, but you now have one tool in your arsenal to start doing your audit methodology. We're actually going to run through about 12 tools. Some of them are going to be used more than once, so there's about 16 steps, maybe up to 20, using this type of methodology, which is based on all freeware tools that are either easily downloaded off the internet or open source that you can create yourself. But you now have one tool. So using this, now we're going to start talking about all the other ones, and you're going to start to see this formation of something that you can potentially make into a batch file or a script that you can run against one server. One thing I want to point out is that a lot of the tools we're going to show you today, because they are freeware that you guys can use yourselves or open source, many of them only run locally. This contradicts one of the things we said earlier, which was scalability and safe. Running tools locally is not scalable, because if you have 1,000 servers, you're not going to locally run it on all of those 1,000 servers. Second, in terms of safety, anytime you run something locally on a box, there's another chance that memory's going to get corrupt, something's going to happen that's wrong, it's going to take up too much time and effort on the processor's part to actually complete, and it might crash. Something we call the final factor theory. There's a point in a server's processing time where literally the next thing you do will crash it. Well, guess what? If you're an internal audit and you're running this tool and you know the tool works fine and you crash the box, doesn't matter whose fault it was, you're in big trouble. And you're going to get yelled at for a long time. It just so happens it might have been Notepad that crashed it, so we want to make sure that we are using an audit methodology that is going to be safe and scalable.
Getting back to security configuration analysis and the system audit, the other area that Todd talked about were the system services. The great thing we like about the Security Configuration Manager is it allows you not only to view the system startup status, whether or not it's set to automatic, manual, or disabled, but it also allows you to view the service permissions. There's a really good example of the NetDDE exploit. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that exploit. But one of the things that exploit took advantage of was the fact that any user could start the service. It wasn't limited to administrators that had the ability to start that service. So as a non-privileged user, you could start the NetDDE service, and then you could run an exploit based on that. So one of the things that's really important to do when you're looking at services is not only look up at the startup status, but also look at the security descriptors and the permissions on those services. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of tools out there right now that do that. Likewise, though, with services, one of the things that we don't like about the SecEdit tool is that you don't get the executable path. So you don't know what's kicking off the alert or service. Is that stored in the WinNT System32 directory? Is it stored somewhere else? If you're running SQL Server, you don't know where SQL Server is installed. You don't know what context something like SQL Server is running under. You don't know what context something like Exchange is running under. So you really need a secondary tool or something else that's going to show you what context it's running under and also what file path it's running under. And that's really where MS-Info32 comes in.
Yes. Again, just to make sure we cover on this an extra time, the idea behind going after registry values first is because the registry is going to hold things like what service pack you're running. It's going to hold your version of the operating system so that if you're running remotely, you can actually pull that without having to do any API calls. You're going to find out, oh, I had a whole bunch of them. System path. System path, thank you. So yes, when you go after the registry values, you have to go after it first. You want to find out what these things are that the box is doing. And then you can customize the rest of your activity based on that. As a matter of fact, if you pull the version of Windows first as the first registry value, you know the next few registry values you're going to have to pull after that based on what version of Windows is running. Because we were saying earlier, registry values are going to depend on the version of Windows.
Right. Another example that Todd already pointed out earlier, with registry values, you get the list of allowed paths. Those are your exceptions to the WinReg key rule. So now you want to look at registry permissions on those allowed paths. You want to see, okay, we say administrators are the only ones that can access the registry remotely, except for these paths. So who can access those paths? So your reg vals feed into your reg perms.
Exactly, which is why registry perms come second.
Yep.
And now we're going to switch into MS-Info32, which talks about
MS-Info32 is also going to give us a lot of that basic configuration information, things like service pack level, OS version, things like that. For those of you that aren't familiar with MS-Info32, it's basically WinMSD with a new interface and a new name. In fact, it looks like if you type WinMSD, it's just a basic executable that actually calls MS-Info32. There's a GUI interface to it that's very slow and kind of cranky. The nice thing is, though, you can actually run it from a command line and export it to specific reports. If you look up there, you can see you can actually kick off a report. You can go a list of categories. You can pull the categories out of MSDN, just do a search for like system summary or something like that in MS-Info32, and that'll pull out the whole listing for you. But the ones that we're most concerned about right now from a system audit perspective is system summary, services, running tasks, and device drivers. That's going to give us a really good idea of what the nature of the server is.
Yeah, like this is something that we scripted because we wanted to be able to run this as quick as possible. And some of the most important things are finding out what context services are running as. Sometimes you'll have a third-party tool running as a service and as local system. If someone can replace what that exe is, they now have administrator. Actually, they have system access, which is even better than administrator access, but it doesn't matter. At that point, you own the box. Another one is device drivers. I just want to touch on this real quick because I don't know many people who do audits that even care about what the device drivers are that are running. A lot of the pieces that come in Windows services for Unix and some of the other third-party applications are running as device drivers that could potentially be harmful for your environment depending on what you're doing. R commands are running as device drivers. NFS is running as a device driver. So
Packet.sys.
Packet sniffers, yes.
Yeah.
That's a classic example. The only way that you would know generally looking at a Windows system that a packet sniffer is installed is to review the list of device drivers that are active.
Likewise, running tasks. I mean, if a lot of rootkits now are trying to hide what running tasks are out there, but if you get a bad one, you may still see that showing up in the task list. These are things that we typically see ignored in a lot of the other products that are out there that are looking at things from maybe just the network perspective. They're not going to give you a process listing or a listing what device drivers are loaded on the system.
Right, just a quick example of process listing that we had at a client, and this isn't necessarily a security related issue, but it's something you should see in an audit and it doesn't make sense. We're going through the production environment, we looked at the list of running processes, and on one of their main production application customer facing servers, they had SETI at home running, which is the search for extraterrestrial life. And somebody had installed that on a production server, and it was causing operational impact. And other than looking at what's running on the box physically, there's no way other than if you see huge network lag, et cetera, you try to follow it up. Eventually, you'll find out that that's what was going on. So, like Joe said, a lot of bad Trojan horses and things like that will still show up there, but there are ways around that.
You want me to pull up MS Info 32 just to see what...
Yeah, I don't know why it's not kicking off for mine. It seems to be dying.
So this is what it looks like. Obviously, from the command prompt, it's just going to dump everything out into a nice little text file for you, which makes it easy for you to manipulate. You can write some quick, what is it? Perl, right? That's what you use?
Yeah, Todd.
I mean, this guy.
Todd becomes a manager, and Perl all of a sudden is a foreign word to him.
Yeah, I don't know. Thank you. Nothing like embarrassing me in front of everyone.
No problem.
So this is MS Info 32's GUI. And again, you might as well just go to the help and take a look at all the commands you can run from the command prompt with it, or just do a /?, and you'll be able to see all the reports. But those are the 4 we recommend for comprehensiveness of a methodology. HFNet check. This is an extremely important one. We're not going to do a full demo on it because I think many of you were in Eric Schultz's presentation. Microsoft was just here showing you exactly. So Microsoft has this new free tool developed by Shavlik Technologies that will look at your entire system and tell you how patched or not patched you are. This is very important because, you know what, at the end of the day, we can order the box till we're blue in the face for registry keys, permissions, users, groups. If you're not protected against some buffer overflow that runs over port 80 on the IIS services, then they're going to get access to your box. So a way to look at all of the patches on system is made pretty easy through this HFNet check tool. And the idea behind it is it will look at the patches for SQL, Exchange. I don't know if they've done Exchange. I know it's SQL, Windows, IIS, and Internet Explorer. I think there's even some Office patches in there. So it's fully comprehensive. If you don't want to use something like HFNet check, which is free, and you would rather use something that you've developed yourself, not a problem. You can go into the registry where the Q article is based on a security patch that's been written is located, and you can look to see if it exists. If the Q, which is just a query for Microsoft's knowledge base, exists, then you know you've been patched. Yep. So the other way you could do it, of course, is to download the checksums of all the files from Microsoft's website and then do a little checksum on your own files. But now we're talking about why people don't like internal auditors, because we do things like that.
Yep.
And then lastly is SA, which I guess you want me to...
Yeah.
I mean, you can just
SA is basically a tool that is part of the Microsoft Platform SDK for Windows. So the source is available, and it's basically just the tool that we chose to compile and demonstrate for this one task of gathering tasks.
Just one task of gathering tasks?
Yes.
Is that what?
One too many tasks. And again, if you don't like the output, it's open source. Go ahead, change it. Stick your company name at the top of it.
This is odd. This is a different box I'm on right now, and I've got jobs scheduled from like October 2001. I have no idea what those jobs are.
So you don't audit your system on a periodic basis to determine what jobs are running?
No, not at all. See, that's the problem.
But there are a couple reasons that it's important to look at tasks here. The first being that these are things that are going to execute on your system. And starting with IE4 on NT4, the model changed from @ to the task scheduler, and you had a lot more flexibility and granularity with the scheduling. So you can see what context, what account the task is running as. Is it a user? Is it an admin? Et cetera, et cetera. And also, what is the executable path to that job? So if it's C:\temp / Trojan.bat, that's obviously a bad thing. But if it's a job that we want, if it's a backup that we've scheduled, then what we want to do is look at the permissions, the NTFS permissions on that executable file. So maybe we have it locked down, people can't change the scheduler, people can't submit jobs, they won't be able to add anything in that way, but they just go find the executable path and replace the exe itself.
And this is a good example of that right there. You can see if we use the @ command, no jobs show up as being scheduled, but if you use SA, it actually shows that there are 2 jobs from October. That's actually my birthday. I have no idea what those jobs were. Someone must have left me a present that were scheduled.
David actually just started touching on, and now that we've completed system security assessment, it's good to mention this, but try to think of the Fabulous 5 as a clock. And at 12 o'clock, you have system, and then, so let's see, that's clockwise for me, so clockwise for you would be, so it's going to be system, audit, network, resource, user. And what happens is you have all of these disparate audit security assessments that you need to do. So there's 2, one here. What happened is we just completed system. Now we have all of this information up here that we've gathered. Well, David just gave you the example of the task scheduler. You now have an EXE that runs as system. So when we get down through the clock to the resource part, which is down here at your 7:30, then you're going to start seeing that you need to start bringing things up from your security assessment into your resource security assessment. And as we go through this audit methodology, you're going to start seeing how it really is comprehensive, how things in system are going to go down to resource. Things from user are going to be coming from network. Things, the network's another good one that we're going to touch on, but network, when you look at to see if IIS web service is running, which by default is on all installations of Windows, you're going to start having to pull IIS virtual routes into your resource security assessment to find out if NTFS permissions are actually commensurate with what people should be doing.
Right, so far through services, we could tell that Exchange is running or that SQL is running. So now we need to look at certain registry keys, certain file permissions, certain application level settings for Exchange, SQL, terminal server, etc., things like that. So those feed into there. We have the other example Todd just did with the scheduler. Also, it's running as a certain context, maybe not local system, so we need to funnel that into users so that, and groups, so that when we get there, we can look at that user and find out what groups are they a member of, what user rights does that user have, either explicitly or effectively.
This is a key part of the customization process. This is more than just taking the standard files and directories that are out there and looking at those. This is saying, here's a service executable that we've never heard of that's located on the D drive. We need to look at the perms there as well, not just the standard WinNT, System 32, et cetera.
And it'll become much more clear as we go through the Fabulous 5 security assessment areas. We've only talked about one, so you might be thinking to yourself, I don't understand how it all links together, but it will be more clear, hopefully.
Okay, so the second block of this is auditing, which basically talks about our auditing policy. Clearly, out of the box, we all know that auditing is disabled. So you need to turn it on and set some options so that we start having an audit trail. The flip side of that is, even though we've turned auditing on, we then later need to make sure that we actually have resources that say audit this. So make sure we're auditing this directory, auditing this registry key, so on and so forth. Event logs, are they big enough to hold our amount of data? Are they overwriting data, presenting data to us in a timely fashion so that we can review it and really get an accurate picture of what changes are being made to the system, how the system is being used? And then through network alerts and performance monitor, which we're not going to touch on too much, we can schedule different things that say, all right, here's a threshold, we've got too many failed logins, we need to act. Right. So for our configuration issues, as I kind of just touched on, we need to make sure that we are auditing a proper amount of information, enough information, but not too much. And if you sat in on some of the other classes or presentations, people have given good examples of process checking or object access generate a lot of information that in production environments may slow down systems or may provide and inundate you with information. It's useless at that point. It's too much. Then, as I said, files and directories. Even though you've got an audit policy that says, failed object access, we're going to look at that. If you don't then go and set the system access control list on a directory in a file, on a registry key, on a printer, on other things, then it doesn't matter that you check that box. Same with the registry, and then again with our log settings, we want to make sure they're sufficient.
So we return back to SecEdit, as we're going to several times. The audit settings, again, they're kind of spread out over two areas. One is the local policies, the audit policy. Within there, you'll see each of the options that you can audit, whether that be account logon events, account management, directory service accesses, logon events, object access, policy change, privilege use, process tracking, and system events. Again, for every environment, how much of this you're going to turn on and enable is going to probably differ based on your regulatory requirements, particularly whether or not you're going to log successful and failed logon events. That's going to depend on what your stance is from a forensic perspective and how much data you want to collect. In general, as David was indicating, you probably don't want to audit process tracking. You probably don't want to audit every successful privilege use, because that's going to pick up bypass traverse checking successfully, and that's going to create a lot of audit entries. So you do definitely want to tweak that. And then likewise, the event log settings, you can actually look in here and you can view how large the event logs are, what's the overwrite setting, are they being overwritten every 7 days, are they being overwritten as needed, et cetera. Another key point in here, you can actually see whether or not guest access to the event logs is being restricted properly.
Right. And then, so that's great, and that gives us a lot of information, but it doesn't give us a picture of what's going on, what's really being audited, what's in the event log. And that's where we say maybe we want to bring in a resource kit utility like dump EL, dump event log. It's a command line utility, very easy to run. You basically supply it with the name of the log you want to dump, security, application, et cetera, and it will spit out the logs. Now again, maybe there's too much information in here. So one of the nice features of dump EL is that it lets you filter by event ID. So you can go look in Microsoft documentation and say, all right, I want to see security policy changes. That means something has, somebody's changed the way the auditing on this box happens. I want to see account lockout events. I want to see, account disabled events. So you can filter, pick out
password.
529, 539, 618. You give it those options, and you just run this small command line, and it'll dump out those specific events. And now you can say, all right, do I have any security policy changes? No. Oh, yes, I do, and it was right here. What happened? This wasn't scheduled. Let me go follow up. And you get, you've all seen the event log.
Yeah.
So
Part of the audit is for detection. So that is why you want to filter out 529 and 539, which are account lockout and incorrect password guesses. And then say to yourself, well, there seems to be an inordinate amount of password guesses at this one account. And it kind of happens 3 times every minute, which is odd because I have my counter reset after 1 minute. So those are the types of things you want to look for. And dump EL is going to make this so much easier for you than to have to go through the GUI event viewer and look at all these things manually.
This gets back to what we discussed originally about relevancy and timeliness. By filtering this event log this way, you're going to get only the information that's relevant to you, and you're going to be able to do the audit in a much more timely manner.
Okay, so that feeds us into network security. And basically the things here we're caring about are network resources. So domains and trust. What does the environment look like? Who can talk to who? If we have our domain and there's another domain and we have great security over here, but they have lousy security over there and there are trusts, we all know that basically we might as well have lousy security too. So we want to know what the environment looks like. And the next thing, we care about what protocols are running. If we're running NetBUI, NetBIOS, IPX, what's going on? How are different machines talking to each other? And then also IIS is something that lives here in network security. And we basically want to see how is IIS configured. There are, aside from patches and updates and hotfixes, there are a lot of application level settings that prevent or allow a high level of access to your machine. A lot of you know that things like the .htr and .printer script mappings in IIS provided a way to get access to the system very easily. By default, there are a whole list of application mappings, extension mappings in IIS. We want to see what those are. Have the defaults been removed? If we're only using HTML, we don't need anything in there. If we're only using ASP, only ASP should be in there. You should not provide functionality that you don't need. So that's basically that. Same with FTP, SMTP. and NNTP, which we don't see too much. But that basically leads us into the tools. What do we use? How do we look at these things? So in the admin scripts directory of an IIS installation, you get a utility called adsutil.vbs. It's a Visual Basic script that dumps what's called the metabase. The IIS metabase is equivalent to the registry for Windows. So it's basically like IIS's big giant configuration file. And if you run, so you use it here with cscript, which is the command line script interpreter. cscript, adsutil, enum. You can use enum, which will dump out a whole bunch of information as you'll see, or you can use get to just get specific values. We'll do an enum here, and then W3 SVC is the web service. You can also use FTP service, etc.
Yep.
So if we dump this out, we'll wait, and then you see on the left are metabase entry names, and on the right are their values. So here we see that the anonymous username is iuser_Davy, which tells us that Joe's machine's name is probably Davy, and enable directory browsing is set to false. That's one of those things. If there's no default document in the directory, are people going to get a listing? Generally, we don't want that to happen. So here it says false. That won't happen. And our default docs are default.htm and default.asp. If that was set to true, and all of our directories did not contain default.htm or default.asp, people would be getting directory listings on our site. Keep going.
So again, if you script this, you'll be able to pull out very important information like what are the IIS virtual routes? What is the user right that is required for the iUser account to access the IIS services? By default, it is access the computer from the network, log on locally. However, using this metabase, not the registry anymore, that was in the old case, and then NT40 is the registry. In new versions of Windows, including Windows 2000, the metabase will have an entry for the logon right, and you can actually set it to access the computer from the network, log on locally, which it is by default, or the batch job one.
Yep,
log on as a batch job?
Yep.
Yeah, something like that.
Yes.
Sorry.
And so there's a whole bunch. There's script maps that we talked about earlier. So here we can tell that on Joe's box, he has not removed some of the default script mappings. So, .asa and CDX is there. But we know .printer is not there, and .htx is not there. So he has gone some of the way. So he has looked at this. So maybe he has valid business reasons for still leaving these here. Some of the other things we want to look at are what kind of access rights are there? Read, write, index, things like that. We want to see if parent pads are allowed. Can you use // Because we know there are some vulnerabilities that go along with that. We care about, are detailed error messages sent back to the browser when people have an error? Or does it just say, page could not be found? Or does it say, unable to find /inetpub, www, blah, 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 that you requested? And then you're giving them enticement information, which we're trying to minimize. So there's a ton of stuff in here that is valuable and important, and adsutil lets you suck it out nicely.
Yeah, it's also the place where you can pull out the IIS auditing settings. Those are listed in there under the log extended settings as well.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Serve check.
Serve check.
Okay. So the next one, while we're still in network security, is shares that Todd mentioned. So shares is one of those places that is a wide open access point into your system. You create a share, you're basically saying to someone, you have some amount of access at this point on my file system. So you care here about two levels of security. One, what do the share permissions look like? And two, you then take that information, feed it into resource, and say, what do the NTFS level permissions look like? ServeCheck is a utility, again, it's a resource kit utility, and it only gets us part of the way. But the part of the way that it gets us is it will show us any shares on the system that have an access control list. So here we see we have a sysfile share, a netlogon share, and a black hat share. And at the share level, we have administrators full control on that, everyone read on that, everyone read on sysfile. The problem is ServeCheck doesn't show you any shares that have a null DACL. By default, when you create a share, there's no access control list, which is effectively the same as everyone full control. So as Joe did a net share here, you can see there's also a C dollar, an admin dollar, an IPC dollar. Now, those by default are admin shares, which means they have no DACL and you can't change them, so it's okay. But if Joe had another share here that he had created that had no access control lists on it, we would need the combination of the two to see it. Again, this is only part of the story, though, because now that we know everyone has read on sysvol, or everyone has full control on whatever it was, what do they really have? And we won't find that out until we get down into resource.
The other tool that you could potentially use for some of this is DumpSec. DumpSec does have the ability to pull a list of available shares, a list of particular share permissions. It's a little bit more difficult because it's not quite as robust about pulling all the shares at once. It would take a little bit more effort to actually script that. Likewise, DumpSec, for those of you that are familiar with it, would also pull trust relationships as part of that. You could launch it and you could pull specific trust relationships as well.
Right, and DumpSec is the newer version of DumpACL, which you may be familiar with, and it's a free tool from SomarSoft.
So to actually pull the trust relationships, it's part of the policies report. You would launch DumpSec, go to the report menu, do dump policies. It would dump the policies, and under trusted domains, it would actually list any trusted domains that are there. And then the last part of the network settings, basic information, basic blocking and tackling, using ipconfig and netstat -a to basically pull the IP address information, and netstat to pull any listening and active services that are available. Other tools that are out there, you could use something like fport or nmap to get a list of active services as well, obviously. Looking at resource security, this is, again, a very large part of the audit, a very critical part. And like we've been talking about, all the other things we've done up until this point should feed into resource security. Yes, you're going to want to look at things like WinNT, System32, drivers, etc. But it's also critical at this point to look at any system services that are out there and any executables that are running under them. It's critical if IIS is running to locate the inet pub directory. That may not be, hopefully it's not on the C drive. Hopefully it's not C:/inet pub. Hopefully it's on the DE or some other drive. So taking the information that you got during the network checks and the system checks to understand, is IIS installed? And if it is, where is it installed? And then looking at it at that point is a critical step in this process. Historically, under the NT4, what we were really concerned about here from a resource perspective were registry permissions, file and directory permissions, permissions on shares. A new thing that comes up with Windows 2000, obviously, is Active Directory permissions. What are some critical Active Directory containers and organizational units, and what are the ACLs on those directory objects? This is something, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of tools out there that do that. There are some that we'll talk about. Microsoft's provided some in the resource kit. And this is a critical step in assessing any Windows 2000 environment, is sitting down, looking at the Active Directory structure, figuring out which OUs are critical, and figuring out what the access controls are on those OUs. So I think we listed all those critical resources. Again, to access the legacy things, that would be the file and directory permissions, the registry permissions, you'd use secedit. There's a file system area where you could go in there and you could define what are the defaults. I would definitely start with that default listing, and then once you find out what are the other critical areas in there, you'd add those in. Likewise, registry permissions, you can go in, you can define, if you go out to the Microsoft website or you read the NSA configuration or any other manual you'd like, you're going to get a laundry list of registry values and keys that should be secured as well.
Right, and then on top of those, you would want to dump in, any custom in-house apps that you have that write to the registry. You want to pull out those and throw them in there too.
Looking at DSACLs, because that's actually, I think, one of the more interesting ones. DSACLs is actually a lot like CACLs or XCACLs or any of the other command line tools out there that will dump access control lists, except it does it for the directory services. The use of the tool is very simple. It's DSACLs, and then you just put the LDAP path that you're concerned about. Let's say we wanted to know what the permissions were on the user container. You'd type cn equals user, comma, dc equals the domain name. In this case, it's going to be gold, comma, dc equals black hat, comma, dc equals com. So, what is wrong there? Apologize. Is that not what I typed? Thought I typed that.
So one of the important things that you want to make sure during your audit methodology is that you are looking at permissions on Active Directory objects, as Joe was saying. You want to make sure that people can't change. You know, it doesn't. If you're looking at the container for who the administrator is, and someone has, and everyone has write permissions to it, well, then anyone who's not an administrator can add themselves to the administrator group. You also want to make sure that you include this part into your methodology if you are indeed on the domain controller and you indeed are in Windows 2000. So again, you want to make sure you pull that stuff from the system security assessment, and now the demo's ready.
Yep. And this is going to be a key one. As Todd was saying, I mean, you want to make sure that you know where all your admin user objects are, and based on what, and this is another linkage between user and between resources. You find out you've got a domain admin account that's in a specific OU called, you know, West Users, and control of that OU has been delegated to the help desk. Now your help desk can reset that domain admin account's password. So looking at the ACLs, I mean, you want to make sure you're looking at your basic ones like users, domain controllers, config, things of that nature, and you want to look at any specific custom ones that you have out there, and that's going to have to be customized to your environment. MS Info 32.
Which we've seen before,
Yeah,
and I don't know, we can pull it up again,
Yeah.
but it's basically the 4 commands earlier. I don't know if we want to show.
What it does give you the ability to do as well is the drives report, which actually will show you whether or not all your drives are NTFS, if there are any fat drives that are out there. It'll also give you configuration information related to the amount of free space that's available on each drive. Obviously, you'd want to know if any of those drives are going to be close to capacity or something like that.
Right.
EFS and TFS,
Yep.
important things. And then
the last tool we had here relates to, again, it's a platform SDK utility that we just compiled quickly. Basically, what CheckSD does is check security descriptors. So for objects that you can't get through DSACLs or through Security Configuration Editor, like printer permissions. Maybe you have a printer that holds check paper. You want to see who can submit jobs to that, who can manage that printer, who can add and delete printers. So CheckSD, you can just leave it right there. As you can see, you could use it for files. You could use it like a CACLs, but it'll also do a lot of other system objects, like printers, like the Windows station or a mail slot. You can also get it with service. Unfortunately here, though, the output is horribly ugly. It actually goes through and lists each individual access control entry within the list, and then its access mask. But again, it's open source, so if you were so inclined, you could pretty it up and do whatever you'd like.
Yeah,
with it.
I mean, that's really a key point for all the tools we're talking about here. We're trying to give you a baseline, a starting point. A lot of these tools are open source. You could take a look at them, and you can actually modify them for your use, which is in fact what we've done. We've taken some of these tools and modified them.
I'll add something too. Horribly ugly is not the worst thing. If it gets you off your box really fast and it works, then and it gives you all the information you need, horribly ugly isn't all that bad. You know, it just means that you're going to have to spend a little extra time on the back end reviewing it. But
Right, again, but going back to Todd's earlier point, if you get your information quickly, but it takes you an extraordinarily amount of long time to go through it, then your information is no longer timely.
Yep. Moving on to users. Obviously, we're all concerned about users. When we talk about users, we're also talking about the groups that those users are a member of. We're concerned with what are the user account policies? Do any users have passwords that do not expire? Are users being forced to change their password upon logon? What are the account policies? Is there account lockout? Well, obviously, we're not going to go through password length and things like that. I think you've all probably at least heard that once in your life, if not 100 times. But user rights as well. What privileges do specific users or specific groups have? This is all very central to getting a good understanding for the server as a whole.
Right, and again, this is one of those places where something as simple as the platform you're looking at matters. Because if it's Windows NT, you've got 27 user rights. If you're in Windows 2000, you've got 34. When you get to .NET Server, you're up to 37. And you need to make sure that your methodology is growing with the new operating systems.
And likewise, along those same lines, one of the weaknesses, DumpSec was a great tool for Windows NT for dumping users and groups. Not so well for Windows 2000 for a couple of reasons. One, nested groups. You can do nested groups in Windows 2000. Well, if you've checked the option within DumpSec to fully expand each group, it'll get caught in an endless loop as soon as it gets to a nested group, because it gets trapped in there trying to expand that group. Likewise, it's not aware of all the new Active Directory properties within DumpSec. So DumpSec was a tool we used quite a bit in the NT4 world to dump user properties and group properties. And then Windows 2000 world had to go back to the SDK, look up a couple things, and write a quick program that would go ahead and dump that for us. But the basics, the account policy information, which is also basic user information, is all really stored within or really obtained through the SecEdit utility, security configuration and analysis. You can get password policies, account lockouts, things of that nature.
Okay, and then as Joe said, to kind of mitigate the shortcoming of DumpSec in the Active Directory world, another Microsoft tool is the Active Directory Services Viewer, ADSVW, that is a GUI utility that it's very raw, but it basically dumps the information that you need. Yeah, so just click OK. So here we basically just pointed it at the root of his box. So we just did an LDAP : and then the server name and then a :389 because that's the LDAP port. And if you click on each one of these objects on the left, it expands and gives you the stuff that's in there. So in the built-in container, we have these groups: account operators, administrators, backup operators. When you click on each one of those, if there are things inside, like here the users group, if there are objects inside, it'll expand and it'll give you the list of those objects. And then when you click on those individual objects, it'll put all the properties in the right-hand side. For example, you see the ads path shows you the full, fully qualified domain name of that object. Yeah. And this is where you can really see a user property and a user and group membership perspective in AD.
And the code for this tool is all in MSDN as well.
Is it?
It's actually an example, which is what it was really originally written for. So it's another tool that you could take and you can tweak just a little bit more to specifically work in your environment.
Right.
And then lastly is passwords. Of course, that's usually the #1 way a hacker breaks in is by guessing a simple password. So it's important for you to actually audit these passwords if you don't have other controls in place to make sure they're long and complex using password filters, etc. So there are tools out there that allow you to dump passwords. There's a lot of them. So PW, you could tell by the organization of this presentation that they give me the difficult tools to to demonstrate to you. But don't let that take away from my extraordinary skill set here. The tool dumps out a NTLM and, no, what is it? It's a LAN manager version of the hash, and it's a NTLM, whatever you're using, version 2, whatever, however it's going to be stored a bit, depending on, right? So,
yep.
So you then need to throw that into a brute force cracker, like Loft is the most famous one. I mean, that'll do the job, but there's a lot of other ones out there.
Quick, write down that hash.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
And the purpose of this, of course, is for administrators to make sure that this is a really good way for administrators to force their users to have good passwords. Because if he throws it into Loft and lets it run on a fast computer, just let it run for a day, there's no point in doing a brute force attack. You just want to check it against dictionary words. Then he can or she can go up to them individually and say, look, I'm going to disable your account. Your password is the word welcome. This is some point of contention because obviously some companies don't want their administrators dumping out passwords because it allows the administrators to impersonate the users. However, based on your policy, you might want to implement a control like this. Sometimes it's good for you to do it, sometimes it's not. You want to make sure there's other controls in place like password length, password filters, etc.
Yep.
Right, and again here, just to tie back to some of the information earlier, we saw user contexts on scheduled jobs. We saw users and groups listed in ACLs in resource security. So this is the point where now we have a list of all these users and groups that have access to all these different resources and are the context for services, the context for jobs, all of the system. This is when we really look and say, okay, who are these people? What are the properties of those user accounts? If it's a service executable account, does it have a strong password? Just to tie it all back.
So now we've covered the fabulous 5. We've covered an entire audit methodology going around all 5 security segments. So now you're probably saying, okay, great, now I could run off and go do my audit methodology. No problem, I'll just go figure out what freeware tools that are best for me and download them all. But wait, there's more. It was a lot less cheesy when we came up with it last night.
No, it was just as cheesy.
And what we want to do now is tie it all together. Risk management. Actually, we just kind of covered that with the password hash, but you want to make sure that what you're doing does follow the risk management procedures of your company. Some of them have more stringent procedures, some less. That's not going to be part of your audit methodology unless you're actually going to bubble up to that level, but you want to make sure that what you're doing is within your standards. You want to make sure that it's okay to run things locally if that's the methodology you're going to use. You want to make sure that you are dumping out things that aren't confidential to who you are, in other words, password hashes. It's important that you actually are following this, whatever regulatory requirements you have, you're actually obeying them by doing your audits on a regular basis. I think, HIPAA requires, actually I don't know the specific numbers, but HIPAA does require there to be certain security certain security audits done. So that's the timing piece. Comprehensive, again, it's so important to remember these 3 pieces. You want to make sure that all of the fabulous 5 get covered by comprehensiveness, relevancy, and customization. You've got to make sure that your audit methodology is tweaked, tailored, and targeted towards your environment. You really cannot just go download someone's tool and say, okay, I'm running it, it works. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to tell you if you are vulnerable. It's going to tell you if some generic standard server is vulnerable.
And I think the final thing there is these are some tools. There are obviously other tools out there. There are things like ISS and CyberCop, which are going to do some other similar checks. What you need to do is sit down and look at what are your existing tools you have today that your staff has, that they're comfortable with, and what are the gaps to fill in the rest of that methodology. Maybe you only take 3 tools away from what we talked about, or maybe you only take the 3 ideas away because you've got some other tools that are doing parts A through X or whatever, but you still need Y and Z. So taking what you have, doing that gap analysis to the methodology and saying, here are the other tools we need. We're either going to go out and we're going to use an existing product or we're going to build our own.
Right.
Most of the stuff is fairly simple to build
building,
yourself.
yeah, you could build your own.
Right. Basically, this is the process that Joe said at the very beginning of the presentation. This is what we did starting a couple of years ago. And we determined that for our needs, managing this kind of a multi-tool environment, things that would allow changes to the system, et cetera, wasn't acceptable for PricewaterhouseCoopers. So what we did, we don't have a script that incorporates these, but we have a proprietary program that incorporates all of these concepts and hits on all of these areas and basically goes through in the order that we discussed today so that when you first hit system security, it determines the type of system we're looking at and then moves down the line. And it's something we developed, from the ground up in C to do all of these things. And of course, that's an option, for everyone.
Well, at this point, you guys have questions. Obviously, we're here to answer them. We have 7 minutes left. But go ahead and shoot. And if you have no questions, obviously, you're welcome to leave. Our contact information is up here. Feel free to email us if you want whatever the presentation.
Plenty of business cards up here.
Yeah,
feel free to step up.
And again, we will give this version of the presentation to Black Hat to put up on the website so that you can all download it.
And if any of you are having trouble finding some of these tools, if we talked about tools and for some reason you can't find them on the web, send us an email. Everything we talked about is free. We can shoot it to you, or we can show you where to get it from the SDK, et cetera.
David doesn't work very hard. Email him whatever you need. He'll be more than happy to get something for you.
Send it to David first, please.
Sits around. It's really, believe me. Okay, so questions.
Wow.
Excellent.
I think they're ready for Mardi
Wow, I
Gras.
think everyone in this room is ready to go start their own methodology.
We could do our parade right down this way.
I think everybody wants to go to Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
It's 6 o'clock on Mardi Gras. So.
Well, thanks,
All right,
guys.
Thank you all very much.
Enjoy.